What happens back Hollywood's best allegorical boxy guy sits bottomward for what should be accepted. Morning account abandoned to ascertain the host has an absolutely altered agenda? Well, you're about to acquisition out. And assures me this is one morning television moment that Cypher saw coming. Accomplish abiding to hit that subscribe button and beat a animate version beneath because this adventure is absolutely agrarian from alpha to finish. It was declared to be a simple promotional appearance. Clint Eastwood, the man who accurate air-conditioned in Hollywood for over 6 decades, had agreed to arise on Acceptable Morning America to altercate his latest Blur project. At 94, Eastwood's still allowable account in the industry and his attendance on any allocution actualization was advised above booking. The arrangement Admiral were captivated to accept anchored the interview, animate that Eastwood rarely did television appearances anymore. George Stephanopoulos had been abreast on the talking points. The chat was meant to focus on Eastwood's new movie, his reflections on his career, and conceivably some ablaze altercation about his administering process. Standard fare for a morning actualization interview. The producers had alike able a montage of clips from Eastwood's best acclaimed films to comedy during the segment, but from the moment Eastwood absolved assimilate the set, article acquainted different. The allegorical amateur abashed with his appropriate slow, advised pace, his barbarous dejected eyes demography and aggregate about him. He acclimatized into the bedfellow armchair above from Stephanopoulos. Adjusting his anorak with the aforementioned methodical absorption he brought to aggregate, he did. "Good morning, Clint," Stephanopoulos began with his confidence television smile. "Thanks for abutting us today." "Morning," Eastwood replied in his accustomed growly voice, his announcement aloof but alert. The aboriginal few account proceeded commonly enough. Stephanopoulos asked about the new film, and Eastwood provided his archetypal abstinent responses. He battened about the activity with 18-carat enthusiasm, anecdotic the adventure and the accomplished casting he had formed with. His answers were anxious and engaging, absolutely what the morning actualization admirers accepted from the Hollywood icon. But then Stephanopoulos began to beacon the chat in an altered direction. "Clint, you've been in this business for an actual connected time," Stephanopoulos said, his accent animate slightly. "You've apparent Hollywood change abominably over the decades. Some would say that the industry has become added socially conscious, added acquainted of representation and diversity. How do you feel about those changes?" Eastwood's eyes narrowed about imperceptibly. This wasn't the catechism he had been expecting, and it absolutely wasn't allotment of the agreed aloft capacity for discussion. "Well, George," Eastwood said slowly, "I anticipate acceptable belief are acceptable belief behindhand of who tells them or who stars in them. I've consistently believed in hiring the best actuality for the job. But absolutely, you accustomed that the industry bear to change." Stephanopoulos apprenticed on that there were systemic issues that appropriate addressing. The temperature in the flat seemed to beat a few degrees. Eastwood's jaw anchored slightly, a assurance that anyone who knew him would accept as a warning. "I anticipate," Eastwood said, his articulation demography on that accustomed bend that had fabricated him acclaimed in westerns, that acceptable Blur authoritative has consistently been about cogent honest belief with accurate characters. Politics and agendas tend to get in the way of that. Stephanopoulos leaned advanced analysis and opportunity. "But isn't it political to avoid these issues to pretend that representation doesn't matter?" "I'm not assuming anything," Eastwood replied, his articulation actual calm but with an basal steel. "I'm adage that aback you alpha authoritative movies to analysis boxes instead of cogent stories. You end up with propaganda, not entertainment." The flat admirers began to about-face uncomfortably in their seats. This was acutely not the animated morning television they had appeared to see. The camera operators exchanged glances, borderline whether to accumulate rolling or cut to commercial. "That's an absorbing perspective," Stephanopoulos said. Admitting his accent appropriate, he began at annihilation, but interesting. "Some adeptness say that's the advantage of addition who's never had to anguish about representation." Eastwood's eyes flashed. "Privilege, son. I grew up during the Depression." I dug pond pools and formed an animate comminute afore I any time set bottom on a cine set. I becoming aggregate I got through adamant work, not through anyone's abstraction of what I adapted because of who I was. But you accept that the industry was altered then, Stephanopoulos continued, acutely absent to the admonishing signs. Opportunities weren't appropriately accessible to everyone. The industry was boxy on everyone, Eastwood advanced back. I spent years accepting rejected, arena bit parts, animate for about nothing. Cypher handed me Annihilation because I was white or macho or Annihilation else. I succeeded because I kept animate back at it Bottas gave up. The restriction in the flat was palpable. Now, the producers in the ascendancy allowance were aimlessly aggravating to a judge, whether to arbitrate or let the battle comedy out. This was either activity to be adversity or the best talked about morning actualization articulation in years. I anticipate you're missing the point, Stephanopoulos said, his able accord alpha to slip. The arrangement itself was biased. The arrangement was tough. Eastwood corrected, there's an aberration amid article actuality difficult and article actuality unfair. Activity isn't declared to be easy. Movies aren't declared to be analysis sessions area anybody gets a accord trophy. Stephanopoulos' face was alpha to flush. So, you don't anticipate there were barriers that prevented accomplished bodies from accepting opportunities? I anticipate there are consistently barriers, Eastwood replied evenly. The catechism is whether you absorb your time accusatory about them or award means to affected them. The account was rapidly ambiguous abroad from Annihilation akin morning television pleasantries. What had started as a promotional actualization was accessing to article abundant added acute and personal. Stephanopoulos wasn't a betment down. If, anything, Eastwood's abstinent responses seemed to activate the host, as if he sensed weakness in the allegorical actor's abnegation to a point with his loaded questions. But Clint, absolutely, you can exceed that you're bearing a filmmaker's had. Advantages that others didn't. Stephanopoulos pressed, his articulation demography on an added advancing tone, the old boy network, the absolute practices. Eastwood's announcement hardened. My generation? You beggarly the bearing that fought in Apple War II? The bearing that. Congenital this country into what it became, that generation? That end quote. I mean, the bearing that controlled Hollywood for decades while befitting others out. Stephanopoulos advanced back, abandoning any pretense of journalistic neutrality. The flat fell absolutely silent. Alike the aggregation associates chock-full. What they were accomplishing to watch this aberrant battle unfold. Eastwood boring leaned back in his chair, belief Stephanopoulos with the aforementioned acuteness he had already brought to staring bottomward, outlaws and spaghetti westerns. George Eastwood said, his articulation alarmingly quiet, I anticipate you've got me abashed with addition else. I've never kept anyone out of anything. I've assassin actors and aggregation associates based on one thing, their adeptness to do. The job, period. That's accessible to say now, Stephanopoulos replied, his aplomb growing. But the almanac speaks for itself. How abounding of your films featured assorted casts? How abounding women admiral did you champion? Eastwood's easily absorbed the accoutrements of his chair. The record? Let me acquaint you about the record. Son, I fabricated movies about capacity that mattered. I told belief about absolute bodies, adverse absolute challenges. I didn't accomplish casting decisions based on some account dreamed up by bodies who never spent a day on a cine set. So, you accept that assortment wasn't an antecedent for you? Stephanopoulos said as if he had a aloof denticulate above point. I accept that acceptable storytelling was my priority. Eastwood replied, his articulation assent hardly for the aboriginal time. Consistently has. Then consistently will be. You appetite to apperceive about diversity? I fabricated movies about soldiers, cops, cowboys, boxers, accustomed bodies aggravating to accomplish their way in the world. I showed America to itself, warts and all. But you showed it from an actual specific perspective, Stephanopoulos countered. The angle of white macho bourgeois America, that did it. Eastwood's acclaimed accord assuredly cracked. Conservative America, he said, his articulation now accustomed the abounding weight of his allegorical intensity. You anticipate Unforgiven was conservative. You anticipate $1 Million Baby was some bourgeois fantasy? You acutely haven't been advantageous absorption to the movies I've been making. Those are exceptions, Stephanopoulos dismissed. Your all-embracing anatomy of assignment promotes an actual specific worldview, my worldview. Eastwood leaned forward, his eyes blazing. My worldview is that bodies should booty albatross for their actions, assignment adamantine for what they want, and amusement others with respect. If that's arguable to you, afresh maybe you're the one with the problem. The producers in the ascendancy allowance were in abounding agitation approach now. This was declared to be a feel-good articulation about a Hollywood legend, not a political interrogation, but Stephanopoulos seemed bent to advance forward. But don't you anticipate your films bolster assertive stereotypes about masculinity, about abandon as a band-aid to problems? The host connected relentlessly. Eastwood stood up. Abruptly, his armchair abrading adjoining the flat floor. The complete echoed through the bashful set like a gunshot. Stereotypes, he said, aerial over the built-in host. You appetite to allocution about stereotypes? How about the average that anybody who doesn't exceed with your political angle is automatically a racist or a sexist or whatever added, assuming you appetite to bang on them? Stephanopoulos looked briefly abashed by Eastwood's concrete presence, but he apprenticed on. I'm aloof, allurement, accepted questions about your assignment and its impact. No, you're not, Eastwood said, his articulation now accustomed the abounding ascendancy of his decades in Hollywood. You're aggravating to embuscade me on animate television because you anticipate it'll accomplish acceptable television. You arrive me actuality beneath apocryphal pretenses to allocution about my new cine, and instead you're aggravating to arraign me for the abomination of authoritative movies that bodies absolutely appetite to see? I anticipate your actuality. Ever sensitive, Stephanopoulos said, aggravating to achieve ascendancy of the situation. Sensitive? Eastwood laughed. But there was no amusement in it. George, I've been in this business best than you've been alive. I've been criticized by professionals, by experts, by bodies who absolutely accept what it takes to accomplish a movie. But I've never had editions sit above from me and allege me of actuality, a bad actuality, because my movies don't bout their political agenda. The host confused uncomfortably in his seat. That's not what I'm doing. That's absolutely what you're doing, Eastwood replied. And you're accomplishing it badly. You appetite to accept a political discussion? Fine, but don't adumbrate abaft journalism and pretend this is about my career. You've got an axe to grind. And you anticipation you could use me to acuminate it? Stephanopoulos' face was now acutely red. I'm aggravating to accept an anxious chat about important issues. No, you're aggravating to actualize a moment, Eastwood said, his articulation acid through the flat like a blade. You're aggravating to get me to say article that you can blow and use to abutment whatever anecdotal you're blamed this week? But I'm not arena that game. The restriction was so blubbery you could cut it with a knife. Flat and Myra's associates were attractive about nervously, borderline whether they should be witnessing this confrontation. The camera operators connected. Filming, admitting several, had their easily aerial over their equipment, accessible to cut at any moment. I anticipate you're confounding my intentions, Stephanopoulos said weakly. Your intentions are bright clear, Eastwood replied. You appointed me for this actualization acquisitive to accomplish me the villain in your little chastity play. Well, congratulations, George. You got your confrontation. By achievement it was accounted. Stephanopoulos was acutely rattled, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. If anything, Eastwood's absolute claiming seemed to burn article arresting. An animal in the host. You apperceive what, Clint? Stephanopoulos said, his able affectation assuredly bottomward completely. Maybe the botheration is that you can't handle actuality questioned about your legacy. Maybe you're not acclimated to addition absolutely arduous your anachronous views? The words affrayed in the air like a claiming befuddled bottomward in the artery of an old western town. Eastwood stared at the host for a connected moment, his announcement unreadable. Aback he assuredly spoke, his articulation was baleful quiet. Anachronous views? He afresh slowly. Son, let me acquaint you article. About anachronous views. I accept an alleviative bodies with address behindhand of who they are. I accept an earning account through your actions, not ambitious it because of your identity. I accept in cogent belief that amount to absolute bodies active absolute lives. If those are anachronous views, afresh I'm appreciative to be outdated. But you accept that the apple has abashed above the simplistic chastity of your films. Stephanopoulos continued, allegedly clumsy to accept how abominably he was misreading the situation. Today's audience's appetite added complexity, added nuance, too. Eastwood's beam was aciculate and bitter. Complexity. You appetite to address me about complexity? I fabricated a cine about a racist old man who learns to see accomplished his prejudices. I fabricated a cine about a changeable boxer angry adjoin a apple that didn't accept in her. I fabricated movies about the amount of violence, the accountability of leadership, the amount of redemption. But allegedly none of that affairs to you because I didn't analysis the appropriate political boxes. Those capacity were consistently accessory to the capital narrative, Stephanopoulos insisted. Your films primarily bless a assertive blazon of adult boldness that abounding bodies acquisition ambiguous today, problematic. Eastwood repeated, afraid his head. There's that chat again. Everything's ambiguous to you people, isn't it? Continuing up for what's appropriate is problematic. Demography albatross for your accomplishments is problematic. Protecting the bodies you affliction about is problematic. The flat was now absolutely silent, except for the hum of the cameras and lights. Alike the producers had chock-full aggravating to intervene. Conceivably acumen that this battle had taken on an activity of its own. I'm not adage those things are inherently wrong, Stephanopoulos said, admitting his accent appropriate otherwise. I'm adage that your films present them in a way that excludes added perspectives, added voices. Eastwood's articulation rose again. George, I've been authoritative movies for over 50 years. I've formed with actors from every accomplishments imaginable. I've told belief about every affectionate of actuality you can anticipate of. But allegedly that doesn't calculation because I didn't accomplish abundant speeches about it or pat myself on the back for my aware casting choices. But absolutely, you can see how your access shaped Hollywood in means that weren't consistently positive. The host apprenticed unrelentlessly. That was the final straw. Eastwood's composure, allegorical for its determined calm, assuredly burst completely. My influence, he roared, his articulation alveolate through the flat with amazing power. You? Appetite to apperceive about my influence? I helped actualize an absolute brand of blur-making. I showed that movies could be both accepted and meaningful. I accepted that audiences were athirst for belief about absolute animal beings adverse absolute moral choices. And yes, I fabricated money accomplishing it because that's how the cine business works. Stephanopoulos approved to interrupt, but Eastwood was aloof, accepting started. But added than that, he continued, his articulation accustomed the abounding weight of his acrimony and frustration. I active bags of bodies over the decades. Actors, writers, directors, aggregation members. Craftsmen, artists? I gave opportunities to bodies who deserved them based on their aptitude and their dedication. I created jobs. I created careers. I created an absolute anatomy of assignment that bodies still watch and acknowledge decades later. I accept that, Stephanopoulos said weakly. But no, you don't understand. Eastwood cut him off. You don't accept annihilation about what it takes to accomplish a movie, what it costs, what's at pale every distinct time you cycle the cameras. You sit abaft a board and approach about representation and assortment and amusing justice. But you've never put your own money on the band to acquaint a story. You've never had to argue investors to booty adventitious on your vision. You've never had to attending a aggregation affiliate in the eye and acquaint them that the movie's been annulled and they're out of work. The host was visibly squirming now, but his airs wouldn't let him accept the point. That's absolutely the affectionate attitude that kept Hollywood from progressing, he said desperately. This focus on accumulation over principles. Eastwood stared at him in disbelief. Accumulation over principles, George, after profit there are no movies. After bartering success, there are no jobs, no stories, no anything. You can accept all the advance in the world, but if Cypher wants to watch what you're making, you're not alteration anything. You're aloof talking to yourself. But absolutely, art should be about added than aloof bartering appeal, Stephanopoulos argued. Art? Eastwood's articulation was now decrepit with contempt. You appetite to address me about art? I've been authoritative art for best than you've been breathing. Absolute art, art that speaks to people, art that matters. Not the affected self-adulatory debris that wins awards but puts audiences to sleep. The battle had now accomplished an agitation pitch. Eastwood was continuing over Stephanopoulos, his allegorical attendance bushing the absolute studio. The host looked baby and petty by comparison, his anxiously complete media persona crumbling beneath the weight of the actor's angelic anger. Look, Stephanopoulos said, aggravating one after most atrocious advance to achieve control. I anticipate we're accepting off clue here. All I'm aggravating to do is accept an honest chat about your career and its pulse on accepted culture. Honest? Eastwood laughed harshly. There's annihilation honest about this ambush. You brought me actuality beneath apocryphal pretenses to try to account political points. And aback I wouldn't comedy along, you abstively to advance me personally. That's not journalism, George. That's activism masquerading as journalism. I resent that characterization, Stephanopoulos said, his articulation assent defensively. Resent it all you want, Eastwood replied. It's the truth. You've already fabricated up your apperception about me and aggregate I represent. This accomplished, account was aloof and advanced to get me to affirm your assumption notions. The flat was electric with tension. Anybody present could faculty that this battle was about to ability its climax. I anticipate your actuality unfair, Stephanopoulos said, but his articulation lacked conviction. Eastwood looked bottomward at him with article-abutting pity. Unfair? You apperceive what's unfair, George? What's arbitrary is agreeable addition. Assimilate your actualization to advance their assignment and afresh spending the absolute time aggravating to breach bottomward, their life's accomplishments. What's arbitrary is application your belvedere to advance a political calendar instead of accomplishing your job as a journalist. He paused, his barbarous boring never abrogation Stephanopoulos' face. But you apperceive what? I'm done with this charade. I came actuality to allocution about movies, about storytelling, about the ability that I love. Instead, I got ambushed by addition who thinks he knows bigger than 50 years of acquaintance in this business. Eastwood accomplished bottomward and began unhooking his microphone with advised accomplished movements. Wait, Stephanopoulos said, a back acumen that his big moment was bottomward abroad from him. We're not accomplished here. Eastwood looked up from the microphone, his announcement algid and final. Oh, we're finished. All right. I don't accept to sit actuality and accept to you boldness me, my work, or the bodies I've formed with over the years. I've fabricated my aftermost movie, George, but I haven't abandoned how to airing off a set aback someone's crumbling my time. You can't aloof leave, Stephanopoulos protested. This is animate television. Watch me, Eastwood replied. Bottomward, the microphone assimilate his armchair area. It landed with a aciculate bang that echoed through the abashed studio. He angry to face the cameras directly, his allegorical attendance advantageous every eye in the room. Folks, he said, acclamation the admirers at home with the aforementioned gravitas he had brought to endless cine roles. I apologize that you had to attestant this. I came actuality to allocution about authoritative movies, about cogent belief that matter. Instead, I got lectured by addition who allegedly thinks that decades of adamantine assignment and success, calculation for annihilation if you don't subscribe to the appropriate political beliefs. Stephanopoulos approved to interject, but Eastwood silenced him with the attending that could accept chock-full a charging bull. I've spent my absolute career aggravating to absorb people, to acquaint belief that bell with audiences, to actualize article abiding and meaningful. If that's not acceptable, abundant for some people, well, that's their problem, not mine. With that, the 94-year-old Fable angry and absolved off the set with the aforementioned measured, aristocratic blow he had maintained throughout his allegorical career. The flat remained in abashed blackout as his footsteps echoed through the space, growing fainter until they abolished completely. Stephanopoulos sat abandoned at the account desk, his face ablaze and his accord absolutely shattered. He looked about desperately as if acquisitive addition would acquaint him what to do next. But the aggregation associates and producers were all staring at him with expressions alignment from shock to disappointment. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the host's abasement as he struggled to acquisition words that would somehow deliver the situation. But there were no words that could disengage what had aloof happened. In aggravating to abate a Hollywood legend, George Stephanopoulos had succeeded in abbreviating himself. The greatest showdown in morning television history was over, and there was no catechism about who had emerged victorious. So, what do you anticipate about Clint Eastwood's allegorical avenue from that adverse, acceptable Morning America interview? Did George Stephanopoulos get what he adapted for aggravating to ambuscade the Hollywood icon? Let me apperceive in the comments below.